The wine was already poisoned. She was the one who poisoned it. Mira Faelan had rehearsed this moment for 11 days. The exact tilt of the goblet, the exact smile she'd wear as she offered it, the exact number of heartbeats she had to disappear from the hall before Hemlock stopped a heart 3 times the size of a normal man's. Her family was chained in a cellar 2 valleys away, and the only currency that would buy their freedom was the blood of Alpha King Cassian Draeven. She had the vial in her sleeve. She had the antidote in the other. She told herself she would choose the poison. She had told herself that 100 times. But when Cassian's molten gold eyes found hers across the banquet table, not suspicious, not cruel, just tired, the way a man looks when he has carried a crown too long alone, her fingers betrayed the plan her mind had made. The antidote slid into the cup instead. Hemlock disappeared into her bodice like a confession she couldn't take back. She had come to kill a monster. She was starting to fear she'd saved a man instead, and that the real danger was only beginning. Chapter 1. The cellar smelled of her mother's fear before Mira ever smelled the rot of the stone itself. 3 weeks. That was how long the hollow accord had kept her family locked beneath the ruined mill at Bracken's Edge. Her mother, her younger brother Toby, her father with his hands still bandaged from where the rebels had made their point on the first night. 3 weeks of visits where she was allowed to see them just long enough to be reminded what she stood to lose, and never long enough to plan anything as foolish as rescue. You have one task, Renata Voss had told her, the Accord's second in command, a woman whose beauty was sharp enough to cut. The Alpha King attends the harvest feast at Duskmere Hall in 11 days. You will serve his wine personally. We've already arranged your post in the kitchens. You will use this. She'd pressed the vial into Mira's palm, small and cool as a river stone. 1 drop dissolves without taste, without scent. By the time he collapses, you'll be 3 corridors away and your family will be riding north to the border. Mira had asked the only question that mattered. And if I fail? Renata's smile had not reached her eyes. Then we start with your brother's fingers instead of his father's. That was 11 days ago. Now Mira stood in the vast gold-lit belly of Duskmere Hall, dressed in the plain grey wool of a serving girl, watching lords and ladies of the northern reach drink wine from crystal goblets while somewhere beneath her ribs her heart tried to climb up her throat and escape entirely. She had never seen an Alpha King before. She had imagined something crueler. Cassian Draeven sat at the head of the long table, a crown of hammered iron resting almost carelessly on dark hair, his shoulders wide enough to block torchlight when he moved. The rumors painted him as a tyrant who'd burned 3 border villages for refusing tribute. But watching him now, Mira saw a man who ate little, laughed less, and kept glancing toward the tall windows as though counting the minutes until he could escape his own celebration. He did not look like a monster. He looked like a man drowning quietly in a room full of people who couldn't see the water. It doesn't matter what he looks like, she reminded herself, fingers curling around the vial hidden in her sleeve. He signed the decrees. He let the border wars happen. My family is chained because men like him decided their lives were an acceptable cost. The steward assigned her the king's wine at the 9th course, sweet reduction poured over roasted fowl, paired with a deep russet vintage from the southern vineyards. Mira's hands were steady as she lifted the ornate pitcher. She had practiced steady hands for 11 days. She approached the head of the table. Up close, Cassian Draeven smelled of cedar and rain-soaked stone, an earthy warmth that made no sense on a man supposedly built from cruelty. His gold eyes lifted to hers and held. Not with suspicion. Not with the bored dismissal lords gave servants. He looked at her the way a man looks at something he's been searching for without knowing its name. Mira's stomach dropped. Your hands are shaking, he said quietly, low enough that only she could hear it over the din of the hall. Forgive me, your majesty. I'm new to service. The lie came smoother than she expected, though her pulse hammered loud enough she was certain he could hear it too. Alphas could hear things ordinary men couldn't, could scent fear like a hound scents blood. If he scented her fear, he said nothing of it. He only watched her pour, his gaze never quite leaving her face, as though he were trying to place a memory that hovered just out of reach. The goblet filled. Ruby dark wine catching torchlight. This was the moment. Renata's voice in her memory. 1 drop dissolves without taste. Her mother's face in the cellar, hollowed by hunger and fear. Toby's small hands, unbroken only because Mira had promised she would do this. Her fingers found the vial in her sleeve. and found without her permission the other one instead. She didn't understand her own hands until it was already done. 2 vials had ridden in the lining of her sleeve for 11 days. The hemlock Renata had given her, and a second vial Mira had bought in secret from a hedge healer in the lower town, 3 nights after Renata's threat about Toby's fingers. An antidote. A hope she hadn't dared examine too closely, because examining it meant admitting she wasn't sure she could go through with murder even to save the people she loved most in the world. She had told herself the antidote was insurance. A mistake correction should something go wrong in the execution of the plan. She had not told herself it might become the plan itself. But watching Cassian Draeven's gold eyes hold hers with that strange, searching intensity, watching him look at her, a serving girl he had no reason to notice at all, as though some part of him already knew her, something in Mira's chest cracked open and refused to close again. The antidote went into the wine. Clear, tasteless, indistinguishable from water. She realized what she'd done only after the goblet was in his hand. Her stomach turned to ice. The hemlock was still hidden against her ribs, untouched, useless now. She had just handed the Alpha King a cup of ordinary, unremarkable wine with a rare and expensive protective tincture dissolved inside it. A tincture meant to save a life, not end one. She had ruined everything. Her family. Toby's fingers. Her mother's face. What have I done? Cassian lifted the goblet. His eyes never left hers. Stay a moment, he said, low, almost gentle. You look as though you've seen a ghost, little server. You have no idea, she thought, throat closing. He drank. Nothing happened. Of course nothing happened. She had made certain of that herself, without meaning to, without understanding her own body's rebellion until the wine was already past his lips. He set the goblet down, exhaled slowly, and something in his shoulders eased that she hadn't noticed was tense until it wasn't. That's better, he murmured almost to himself. I haven't felt this clear-headed in months. His gaze found hers again, sharper now, curious in a way that made her want to flee the hall entirely. What is your name? Mira, your majesty. The lie of omission. No surname, nothing traceable. Came automatically, the last scrap of her training intact even as everything else in her collapsed. Mira. He said it like he was testing the shape of it in his mouth. You may go, Mira. But I find I would like to see you again. She curtsied and fled the hall before he could see her hands shaking harder than before. She didn't make it 3 corridors before Renata found her in the shadow of a servant's stairwell, dark eyes glittering with an expression Mira had never wanted to see directed at her. He's still breathing, Renata said. Not a question. Mira's mouth had gone dry as ash. I watched from the gallery. I watched you pour. And I watched him stand up from that table not 10 minutes ago to walk the grounds like a man who'd just woken from a long illness. Renata's hand closed around Mira's wrist, nails biting crescents into skin. What did you give him? I panicked. The lie tasted like copper. I lost my nerve at the last second. I couldn't. You couldn't. Renata's voice had gone soft and terrible. Do you understand what you've cost your family tonight? Do you understand what happens now? Mira thought of her mother's hollow face. Of Toby's unbroken hands. Of the fact that some nameless, treacherous part of her had chosen, without asking permission from the rest of her, to save a stranger's life instead of ending it. Please, she whispered. Give me another chance. I'll find another way. Renata's gaze raked over her, cold and assessing, before she released Mira's wrist with a shove. You have 3 days, she hissed. 3 days to finish what you started or your brother loses more than his fingers. And Mira, she leaned close, breath hot against Mira's ear, if you run to the king with what you know, if you so much as think about confessing, I promise you will watch what's left of your family burn before you die yourself. She vanished into the dark of the stairwell like she'd never been there at all. Mira stood alone, shaking, the empty hemlock vial still hidden and unused against her ribs. A murder weapon she could no longer bring herself to use, tethered now to a man whose eyes had looked at her like she was something precious he'd been missing his whole life. She had wanted more than anything to walk out of Duskmere Hall a free woman. Instead she had walked deeper into a cage with no visible bars, and at its center sat a king who was, impossibly, still looking for her. Chapter 3. He found her the next morning in the palace gardens, where she'd been sent to help gather herbs for the kitchen. An assignment that felt less like coincidence and more like a summons once she saw him standing beneath the flowering quince trees, sunlight catching gold in his dark hair. "You're avoiding the hall," Cassian said without preamble, as though they were continuing a conversation rather than starting one. "I'm a servant, Your Majesty. I go where I'm assigned." "You were assigned to my wine 3 days from now as well." A faint, wry curve touched his mouth. "I requested it specifically." Mira's basket of clippings nearly slipped from her fingers. "You requested me?" "I don't know why," he admitted, and there was something startlingly honest in the confession, something that didn't match the tyrant of rumor at all. "I've had 100 servants pour my wine over the years. None of them made the room feel like it had finally stopped spinning." He studied her face with an intensity that made her want to look anywhere but at him. "You'll think me mad. I think you have no idea what almost happened to you," she thought, and swallowed the words along with her fear. She should have told him then. Some reckless, foolish part of her wanted to spill the whole truth onto the garden path between them, the poison and the antidote and Renata's threats and her family's cellar prison, and beg him to help her the way she couldn't ask anyone else. But Renata's voice lived in her now like a splinter. "I promise you will watch what's left of your family burn." "I should return to the kitchens," she said instead, stepping back. Cassian didn't stop her. But as she walked away, she felt his gaze on her back the entire length of the garden path, warm and unrelenting as sunlight, and something in her chest ached with the terrible knowledge that the danger closing in around her wasn't only the rebellion anymore. It was also the way he looked at her, like she already belonged to him. Before this story goes any further, if you're enjoying the tangled web Mira's found herself in, make sure you're subscribed to Kazia's Romance Library so you don't miss a single twist. We post a new story like this every day, so hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications if you want to catch every chapter the moment it drops. Now back to the palace, because Mira's 3 days are about to run out. That night, the king doubled his personal guard without explanation. By the following morning, every entrance to Duskmere Hall bore new locks, new wards, new pairs of watchful eyes. A lockdown so sudden and so total that even the senior stewards whispered about it in the corridors. Mira learned the reason from a guardsman gossiping over his morning ale. The king had woken in the night from a dream so violent he'd shattered a bedpost with his bare hand, certain some unnamed threat circled closer to the throne than anyone yet realized. He didn't know how right he was. He only knew, on some instinctive level buried beneath crown and title, that something precious to him stood in danger. And every wall he raised to protect it only sealed Mira more completely inside the very trap she was trying to escape. She was 3 days from Renata's ultimatum, locked inside a palace built to keep threats out, carrying an unused vial of poison and a truth that could burn everyone she loved. Chapter 4. The lockdown made everything harder. Mira's movements were tracked now, guards at every door, a steward who counted heads twice at every shift change, the kind of vigilance that made slipping messages to the Hollow Accord's contact in the lower town nearly impossible. She managed it anyway on the second night, pressing a folded scrap of parchment into the hand of a laundress who owed her a debt from years back at the orphanage school. "Tell Renata I need more time. Tell her I'm close." It was a lie. She had no plan at all beyond surviving each day without either poisoning the king or being discovered as the woman who'd failed to. Cassian sought her out again on the third day, in the narrow servants' corridor outside the royal kitchens, and this time there was no pretense of coincidence in it. "You've been avoiding me for 2 days, he said, blocking the corridor's width with the easy, unconscious authority of a man who had never needed to ask permission to occupy space. "I've had duties, Your Majesty." "Cassian." The correction came low, almost rough. "When we're alone. I find I dislike the distance the title puts between us." Mira's pulse stumbled. "That would be improper." "Improper." He said the word like he was turning it over, testing its weight and finding it lacking. "Do you know, Mira, that I have not slept a full night since the harvest feast? That I find myself listening for your voice in rooms you have no business being in? That I ordered this entire palace locked down because something in my blood insists you are in danger, though I cannot for the life of me explain why a serving girl would draw the attention of anyone with reason to threaten me." The words landed like a blow to her sternum. He didn't know. He didn't know she was the danger, that she'd stood before him with murder folded into her sleeve, that the only reason he was alive to say any of this was a single moment of weakness she still didn't fully understand in herself. "You should stop," she whispered. "Whatever this is. You should stop looking at me like that." "Why?" His gold eyes had darkened, something raw and unguarded bleeding through the careful control he wore like armor. Give me one honest reason and I will. Because I came here to kill you. Because my family is chained in a cellar and the only reason you're breathing is that some traitorous part of my own heart chose you over them. Because if you knew the truth you would have every right to have me executed in the square before nightfall. He said none of it. She said, because I am nobody, your majesty. And you are a king. Something shifted in his expression. Not anger but a kind of fierce, quiet certainty that frightened her more than rage would have. I have ruled this reach for 6 years, he said, and buried a wolf's worth of instinct beneath duty every single day of it. But my wolf does not care that you are nobody. My wolf has not stopped straining toward you since the moment you poured that wine, and I am done pretending I don't feel it too. He didn't touch her. He didn't need to. The words alone closed around her like a claiming, and Mira understood, with a lurch of horror and longing both, that whatever bond his kind spoke of in old stories, whatever invisible tether the wolves called fate, had apparently decided she belonged to him. It did not care that she'd come to the palace to end his life. It only made the coming reckoning so much more impossible to survive. Chapter 5. The message came on the 4th day, smuggled into Mira's basket of mending beneath a false bottom of woven reeds. A single line of Renata's precise handwriting. Your brother lost his smallest finger this morning. You have until the full moon to finish what you started, or the next thing he loses will not grow back through healing. Come to the old chapel at the forest's edge tonight, alone, or we assume you've chosen the crown over your blood. Mira read it 3 times before the words stopped swimming. Then she was sick into the kitchen slop bucket, shaking so hard the head cook asked if she'd taken fever. And she let the woman believe it because the truth was so much worse than any illness. Toby. His finger. Because of me. Because I couldn't do the one thing they asked. She slipped out of Duskmere Hall that night through the laundry passage, one of the few routes the king's lockdown hadn't fully sealed, and ran the 2 miles to the old chapel with her lungs burning and her thoughts a hurricane of guilt. Renata waited inside, alone, a lantern casting jagged shadows across the chapel's crumbling stone. You're still alive to walk here, Renata observed, which means the king is still alive to have let you leave. You had one task, Mira. I couldn't. The confession broke out of her raw and unguarded. I don't know what happened. I meant to use the hemlock. I swear to you I meant to, but my hand. Your hand. Renata's voice went dangerously soft. Or your heart. I've heard the rumors from the palace, little healer's apprentice. The king requesting you by name. The lockdown that started the very night you failed to kill him. Tell me you haven't fallen for the very monster you were sent to end. It's not like that. But even as she said it, Mira knew it was, at least partly, knew that something in her had shifted the moment Cassian Draeven had looked at her like she mattered, like he'd been searching for her his whole life without knowing her name. Renata studied her for a long, terrible moment, and then something colder than anger settled into her expression. A calculation ruthless and final. Then we change the plan, she said. If you won't kill him for us, you'll deliver him to us instead. There's an old wolfsbane trap laid for the eastern hunting grounds. Enough silver in the earth to bring down an alpha twice his size. Lure him there within the week and your family walks free the same night. Refuse and I promise you, Mira, we will send you your brother's hand next, 1 finger at a time, until there's nothing left to send at all. The lantern light wavered. Somewhere beyond the chapel's broken windows, an owl called into the dark, indifferent to the impossible choice closing around Mira's throat like a noose. She had come to Duskmere Hall to save her family by ending one man's life. Now she stood at the edge of a different reckoning entirely, caught between a king who looked at her like a miracle he didn't deserve, and a rebellion that would burn everything she loved to ash if she didn't help destroy him. There was no version of tonight, she understood with a sick, sinking certainty, where she walked away with everyone she loved still breathing. Chapter 6. She didn't sleep that night or the one after. Mira moved through Duskmere Hall like a ghost wearing her own skin, smiling at stewards, folding linens, pouring wine that was never poisoned anymore because she couldn't bring herself to try again. Not after Toby's finger, not after Renata's ultimatum, not after the way Cassian's eyes found her across every room as though some invisible thread pulled taut between them no matter the distance. She had 5 days until the full moon. 5 days to lure an Alpha King to a wolfsbane trap laced with enough silver to kill him, or watch her brother lose more than fingers. She hated herself for the relief she felt when Cassian found her again on the 4th night, In the quiet of the library where she'd been sent to return a stack of ledgers. Relief because for a few stolen minutes she didn't have to think about silver in the earth or her mother's hollow face. "You look like you're carrying the weight of the reach on your shoulders," he said, closing the heavy door behind him with a soft click that felt absurdly like a kindness. "Just tired, Your Majesty." "Cassian." He said it gently this time, not a correction but an invitation, and crossed the room to stand near enough that she could feel the warmth radiating off him, cedar and rain and something achingly familiar now, something her body recognized even when her mind refused to let her trust it. "Tell me what's wrong. I've watched you for days pretending nothing is." The words rose in her throat like a flood breaking a dam. "There's a rebellion holding my family hostage. I was sent to poison you and I couldn't do it, and now they want me to lead you into a silver trap in the eastern woods. I don't know how to save everyone. I don't know if I can save anyone at all." He said none of it. She said, "I'm frightened of things I can't control." Cassian's expression gentled and he reached out, slowly giving her every chance to step back, and cupped her jaw with a hand large enough to span it entirely. His thumb brushed her cheekbone, feather-light, reverent in a way that made her chest ache with grief for a future that could never exist between them. "Then let me help carry it," he murmured. "Whatever it is. I am not without power in this reach, Mira. Whatever frightens you, I can end it." "You are the thing that frightens me," she thought. "You are the thing I was sent to end, and now I can't bear the thought of losing you, and I don't know how to save you and my family both." "You don't even know my full name," she whispered instead. "Then tell me." And God's help her, she almost did. The syllables sat right there on her tongue. "Faelan, my name is Mira Faelan, and my family is dying in a cellar because of people who want you dead." But the memory of Renata's threat pressed dark hands around her throat, and she swallowed the confession whole. "Not yet," she said. "Please. Not yet." Cassian didn't press. He simply pressed his forehead to hers, gentle and slow, close enough that she could feel his breath against her lips, close enough that the mate bond, because that was what this was. She understood now. Some ancient tether wolves called fate sang between them like a struck bell. "Then I'll wait," he said. "As long as you need." She left the library with tears she refused to let fall and a decision solidifying cold and sure in her chest. She would not lead him to the wolfsbane trap. She would find another way, even if it meant confessing everything and begging for mercy she had no right to ask for. Chapter 7. She chose confession on the 5th night, and the rebellion chose betrayal first. Mira had barely reached the base of the eastern stairwell, intending to find Cassian to tell him everything, to throw herself and her family's fate on whatever mercy an Alpha King might possess, when the smell of smoke reached her before the shouting did. The kitchens were burning. Not an accident, she knew that instantly, some animal instinct screaming the truth before her mind caught up. Because Renata did not wait for full moons when patience ran out, and Renata had clearly decided Mira's 5 days of silence meant betrayal rather than delay. Fire. The word tore through the corridors, servants scattering, guards shouting orders, chaos blooming through Duskmere Hall like spilled ink. Through the smoke and screaming, Mira saw them. A dozen cloaked figures moving with purpose through the confusion, blades drawn, and at their center Renata herself, dark eyes scanning the crowd until they landed on Mira with cold, triumphant satisfaction. "You had your chance to help us willingly," Renata called over the din, striding closer with 2 armed rebels flanking her. "Now we take him by force, and you'll watch what happens to traitors who choose crowns over blood." "Renata, wait." Mira lunged forward, but a rebel's arm caught her, wrenching her back, pinning her against the stone wall hard enough to steal her breath. "Where is your king?" Renata's voice had gone razor-thin with fury. "Bring him to us, or we burn this entire hall down with your family's murder on your conscience for nothing." But the answer came not from Mira's mouth but from behind Renata. A low growl that rattled the very stones, followed by Cassian's voice, cold and lethal in a way Mira had never heard from him before. "You've made a grave mistake," Cassian said, "threatening what's mine in my own house." He had shifted partway, not the full change but enough that his eyes blazed molten gold in the firelight, his shoulders broader, claws lengthening at his fingertips as he stalked into the corridor with 6 of his personal guard at his back. Mira watched Renata's confidence falter for the first time since she'd known her. "Your Majesty," Renata began, some scheme already forming behind her eyes. "This girl poisoned your wine at the harvest feast. She's been working against you from the start. We only came to..." I know what happened at the feast, Cassian cut in, and Myra's heart stopped entirely. I've known for 3 days. My physician found trace residue of hemlock in the goblet's lining when he cleaned it. Hemlock and something else. An antidote. Someone switched the poison at the last possible moment, and I have spent 3 days trying to understand why anyone would risk their life to save mine instead of taking it. His gold eyes found Myra's across the smoke-filled corridor, and there was no fury in them. Only a terrible, aching understanding. Tell me I'm wrong, he said quietly. Tell me it wasn't you. Myra's whole body shook. My family, she choked out. They took my family. I didn't have a choice, and then I did, and I couldn't go through with it. I don't know why, She switched the poison to save your worthless life, Renata snarled. And now you'll both die together, Your Majesty, because I don't leave loose ends. She lunged. Chapter 8. Everything happened at once. Renata's blade flashed silver. True silver, rebellion forged, the only metal that could kill an alpha permanently, aimed for Cassian's exposed throat as he turned to shield Mira from the rebel who still held her pinned. Mira screamed his name. He didn't think. She threw herself forward, wrenching free of the rebel's grip with strength she didn't know fear could give her, and slammed into Renata's arm a half-second before the blade found its mark. The silver dagger scored a line across Myra's forearm instead of Cassian's throat, burning, agonizing silver poison already working into her blood, but it wasn't a killing blow. Cassian's roar shook the corridor. What followed was a blur of claws and firelight and the guards' swords ringing against rebel steel. Cassian moved like something out of the old stories, terrible and magnificent, and within moments the rebels who'd come to burn Duskmere Hall lay disarmed or fleeing, Renata herself pinned beneath Cassian's boot with his claws at her throat and murder written plain across his face. Where, he snarled, is her family? Kill me and you'll never know, Renata spat, though fear had finally cracked through her composure. Cassian. Myra's voice came out weak, her vision swimming as silver poison spread from the cut on her arm. Please. Don't kill her. We need her to find them. He looked at Mira then, at the blood running down her arm, at the pallor already draining her face, and something in his expression shattered and reformed all at once. He hauled Renata up by the collar instead of ending her. You will take my men to wherever you're holding her family, he said, voice a low and terrible promise, or I will let my physician's silver poison finish what your dagger started on the woman who saved my life twice over tonight, and you will spend eternity knowing you let her die for nothing. Renata's resolve broke. She gave up the location, a hunting lodge 3 miles past the eastern treeline, guarded by no more than 4 rebels, and Cassian dispatched half his guard within minutes, before scooping Mira into his arms as though she weighed nothing at all. Stay with me, he murmured against her hair as he carried her toward the healer's wing, his voice cracking with a fear she'd never heard from him. Stay with me, Mira Faelan. You don't get to save my life twice and then leave me. He knows my name, she thought hazily as darkness crept in from the edges of her vision. Renata must have said it. He knows, and he isn't angry. He isn't angry at all. The last thing she felt before the world went dark was his lips pressed to her forehead, fierce and desperate, and his voice repeating her name like a vow. Chapter 9. She woke 3 days later in a bed softer than anything she'd known in her life, sunlight pouring gold through tall windows, and Cassian asleep in a chair beside her, still in yesterday's clothes, his hand wrapped around hers as though he'd refused to let go even in sleep. You're awake. His eyes opened the instant she stirred, gold and gleaming with a relief so raw it made her throat ache. The physician said the silver poison came close. Too close. You shouldn't have thrown yourself in front of that blade. You shouldn't have let Renata get that close in the first place, she rasped, and something in his face cracked into the first real laugh she'd heard from him, startled out of him by relief rather than humor. My family, she said, sitting up too fast, pain lancing through her arm. Are they safe? Cassian's hand tightened around hers. My men brought them to the palace 2 days ago. Your mother, your father, your brother, all safe, all fed, all under my protection. Toby is currently terrorizing my kitchen staff with demands for honey cakes, which I take as an excellent sign of recovery. Relief broke over Mira like a wave, tears she'd held back for weeks finally spilling free. Cassian gathered her carefully against his chest, mindful of her injured arm, and held her while she wept, for her family's freedom, for the weight finally lifting, For the impossible mercy of a king who should have had every right to hate her and instead had spent 3 days at her bedside instead. "I came here to kill you," she whispered against his shirt, the confession finally fully spoken. "I need you to know that. I poured poison meant to end your life. And then you didn't," Cassian said simply. "You chose me, Mira. Some part of you, before you even understood what you were choosing, looked at a man you had every reason to hate and decided his life was worth more than your family's ransom. That is not the choice of an assassin. That is the choice of my mate." The words settled over her like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. "Mate? Renata?" she asked, needing to know the last piece. "Exiled along with what remains of the Hollow Accord's leadership, to the far northern territories under permanent watch. They will not threaten this reach again." His thumb traced gentle circles against her uninjured hand. "The council wanted her executed. I chose exile instead for your sake. I understand what it is to be driven to terrible choices by circumstances beyond your control. I did not want her blood on your conscience alongside everything else you've carried." Mira looked up at him. This king the rumors had painted as a monster, who had instead spent 3 days refusing to leave her bedside, who had chosen mercy for the woman who'd nearly ended his life and for the woman who'd conspired against him both. "I don't know how to be a Luna," she admitted. "I don't know how to be anything other than a girl who almost made the worst mistake of her life." "Then we'll learn together," Cassian said and kissed her, slow, reverent, a claiming gentler than any silver blade, sealing a bond that had begun impossibly, with a vial of poison and a moment of mercy neither of them had understood until it was already changing everything. Weeks later, standing on the palace balcony as the full moon rose silver and whole over Duskmere Hall, Mira watched her family below in the gardens. Her mother laughing with Toby, her father finally healed and standing tall, while Cassian's arms wrapped around her from behind, his chin resting against her hair, both of them steeped in a peace neither had ever expected to find. "No regrets?" he murmured against her ear. "None," she said and meant it completely. "Just gratitude that my hands knew what my heart hadn't figured out yet." The moon climbed higher, and the king and his Luna stood together in its light. A rebellion's cruelty transformed into the foundation of something neither poison nor politics could ever touch again. Thank you for listening to this story. Please like, share and comment where you are watching from, and also don't forget to subscribe to this channel for more stories like this every day. Thank you and God bless you as you do.